Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Initial DIY Mods. So today we're starting a new project. This is going to be a big one, probably the biggest one we've had, bigger than the turbo build, bigger than the engine build, bigger than all that. So we've switched gears and we're going into the Mini Cooper. Now the Mini, as everyone knows or most people know, is a front wheel drive, turbo 4-cylinder, 1.6 liter. It puts out about 175 horsepower. Now I've determined that not only is that not enough, but I hate it being front wheel drive. So instead, I already have two rear wheel drive cars with the Miata and the Genesis. So I've decided to make my first all wheel drive car. So I'm going to go ahead and swap in from a donor car. I've already bought the donor car. It's sitting in the driveway, so it is pretty much ready. It doesn't run very well, so I have to fix it up. And then from there, I have to obviously put it into the Mini and then get everything situated. So I'm expecting it to take quite a few months, so I'm going to record and put out a video on this every week of all the work that I've done for the past week and getting everything incorporated. So somewhat of a how-to, somewhat of a just tracking the progress kind of video. So this is the first video in the series, obviously, in order to get everything else set up, in order to get the donor car in order to get the motor to fit. We actually have to pull the engine from the Mini Cooper, pull the transmission, pull a lot of stuff that we know we're not going to need. And then from there, that clears up space to take measurements, to figure out what engine's going to fit, to figure out what we actually have to do, and where we have to fit everything. Because space with the Mini Cooper is going to be the biggest issue. Now, it's not a true Mini. It is actually a BMW Mini, so it is a much bigger chassis. It's still only 2,700 pounds, but it's still got enough space, I think, to fit the engine that we have bought from the donor car. That's going to come out in the next episode, so make sure to watch for that. So the whole plan with this was I pulled the engine and the transmission and everything that I don't need, axles, half shafts, basically those bits, alternator, flywheel, all the stuff that's not going to fit from the other engine. And we listed it on eBay. We've listed the engine and we already sold that within 10 days we sold that engine, which is awesome. That helped provide money to buy the donor car. So now we have this really, you're going to see in the next, it's a raggedy piece of shit donor car. It's the worst car I've ever owned in terms of condition, in terms of smell, in terms of cleanliness. I mean, the amount of animals, critters, fucking debris and Sprite cans and all sorts of gunky, weird wiring that's not hooked up to anything, shit car, and for some reason I bought it. So that's the platform that we're working with. It is, I'm not even gonna tell you what country it's from, but most people can probably guess. So that's the way that we're going. Now let's go ahead and get the engine pull underway. All right, so pulling the engine is relatively simple with the Mini Cooper. First thing we want to remove is the headlights. That lets us access the front bumper as well as the fenders. There's kind of a specific order or somewhat of an order in order to actually take everything off on this car. It's kind of like a bunch of puzzle pieces that were then stacked on top of other puzzle pieces. You have to undo everything first. So the fenders are a real pain. There's a lot of clips that are in the body panels. But once you get those off, I used a deep socket, a small, I believe 7 or 6 millimeter deep socket to help pop those clips off. Now we're removing the front bumper. Again, it's pretty simple, similar to other cars. It's just a lot of little tiny screws and a lot of little tiny clips blocking other screws. Now we're taking off a lot of the boost piping, a lot of the intercooler, turbo related bits. That's my aftermarket intercooler. This is the hose that brings the washer fluid over to the headlight, which has its own cleaning thing. And the crash bar is pretty standard. A unique thing about the crash bar is that it actually bolts to the lower subframe. And because it ties into that, you actually have to remove the washer fluid reservoir in order to access the bolts that are coming from the back that they tie from the subframe into the crash bar. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the top of the core support, this metal piece that comes across. We need to make sure to remove the hood latch cables because they will kind of trip you up on getting this off. So I left the latches in place, but just removed that tray and reconnected the cables. Make sure to have your air conditioning drained professionally. Now the chemicals in here are toxic and they're under pretty high pressure, so you don't want to just go unbolting stuff. Get it contained and drained in a proper location. It's also illegal to vent it to the atmosphere, so keep that in mind. Now the condenser's out of the way, I'm getting ready to take the radiator out. But first, let's clean up a little bit of the mess here. Dun, dun, dun. All right, now we can go ahead and drain some of the coolant. Obviously, there's no drain plug on this radiator. You have to disconnect the lower radiator hose, dump it all into a bucket and hopefully catch it. And that'll get most of it. There's still some that's sitting in the engine and sitting in some of the hosing that goes to the turbo. However, this does get a good chunk of it. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the horns. So I'm going to disconnect the front core support and the wiring that goes to that. I'm going to disconnect the fan wiring, the temperature sensor, and a few other bits that are on the core support. And then from there, I can go ahead and disconnect everything else and remove it from the car. Now we're getting a bit more space here in our engine bay. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the factory air box. It's just kind of annoying and in the way. Keeping some of our AC lines out of the way just to make sure we don't pull them. And disconnecting the downpipe coming off the turbo to the rest of the exhaust. I left the rest of the exhaust in place for now. I'm going to end up gutting that and repurposing that system later on. Of course, we've got to drain our motor oil. We cannot ship a motor if it still has oil in it or any fluids, so we're getting rid of all that as well. Now removing the slave cylinder. This just bolts onto the outside of the transmission. It's a standard slave cylinder with a push rod. The shifter cables are a bit annoying. You do have to whack the crap out of them to pop them off. Just using a flathead really helps in prying those off. Now we're putting the car on jack stands. It's pretty much where it's going to sit now for the next couple months. We're going to go ahead and remove the wheels. I'm putting them in the trunk just to save some space in the garage. Probably won't be reusing those anyway. Removing the axles, we went ahead to AutoZone and rented a 32mm nut to get the axle nuts off. And we just impact wrenched those off and had to hammer out the axles. It did seize on one side, on the driver's side, but I ended up cutting the boot off and yanking the axle out the other way, which was a huge pain. But again, it's not the end of the world. Now we removed the struts and the towers, and now we're pulling the ECU. Once again, a lot of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory when you're actually looking at it, if you pull everything off in the right order. So now we're hooking up to the engine hoist point. The hoist point is kind of awkward because it's on one side of the engine, so I decided to leave the transmission on. That way the engine would sit a bit more balanced when we lifted it out. Now you can put a second bolt on the other side where the engine mounts are, and that'll allow you to get a little bit more of a level lift without the transmission. It is easier to remove the transmission first because it gives you a lot more space. However, it can be done moving it as one assembly, which I'm doing here. It helps to remove all of your mounting brackets because they kind of block your engine from swiveling out of the way. And be careful with your intake manifold because it is plastic, so if you get caught on anything, it might end up cracking, so definitely be careful with that. Now we're just going to pull off the transmission. Since the engine is sold, I'm putting it here on a pallet and sending it to some guy who bought it to put in his Mini Cooper for a rebuild. So just separating the transmission here from the engine block, lifting it out of the way, It's not too heavy. Definitely not light though. All right, thank you guys for watching this episode of Initial DIY Mods. Make sure to check us out at, obviously, initialdiymods.com. That is the new website that is launched. We're looking to launch the store there so you can get some t-shirts and other kinds of cool tidbits, hopefully within the next week or so. Again, it's just my wife and I doing all the filming, the editing, the web channel, all that other kind of crap. So it does take us a little bit of time to get everything set up. But we've got the t-shirts designed, we've got them priced, so now we just have to launch, and we're going to go through a vendor on that. Also, be sure to check us out at facebook.com/initialdiymods. We're also on Twitter, we're also on Instagram, once again at initialdiymods.com. And again, check out that website. It's got a lot of backstory information, it's got a lot of projects, it's got dyno graphs from the other cars that I've owned in the past couple of years. So there's a lot of good info. There's reviews on parts. There's links to my wheel well account. So you guys can check out the other builds, all the parts that are on there. There's I believe one review already live, and we're writing some other reviews on parts that have been installed, as well as a few other things. So be sure to check out that page when you can. Once again, that's initialdiymods.com. All right, thanks guys, and we'll see you on the next episode when we introduce the donor car. All right, guys, thanks again. Hey guys, welcome to another episode. Wow, 3 seconds in, already fucking up. All right, it's gonna be an awesome recording.